Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 477 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Today's episode, I'm on the road again. I just can't wait to be on the road again. Okay, good old Willie. This is going to be one of those rambling reflections from the road. This time it's the road to StokerCon. I'm recording this from a hotel in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I am attending StokerCon. And this recording you're going to hear is me ramblingly, reflectively in my car on my way from Waterloo, Ontario to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for StokerCon. And I'm going to forego the comments from recent episodes as well as personal update, because the entire episode technically is a personal update. But we are going to get to that right after a word from this episode's sponsor. Hey there, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre with a quick question for you. What are you doing November 10th through 14th, 2026? Because if you write books, or if you want to, I'd love to see you in Las Vegas at AuthorNation. I'm speaking there, and I'm going to be hanging out, so just come on up and say hi. AuthorNation, the world's largest indie conference, is an annual gathering where authors come together to support one another, collaborate, and push the craft and business of writing forward. It's not a stuffy conference. It's a room full of people who get it. All of it. The grind, the sweat, the frustration, the goals of getting your story into the hands of the right readers. Whether you're just starting out or you're already running your own publishing business, AuthorNation has it for you. Check it out at AuthorNation.live, and I'll see you in Vegas. Hello, Reflectives. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre, and I am currently going over top of the bridge in Hamilton, Ontario, the huge, beautiful bridge that's now part of the city's iconic, the logo. And I'm crossing over a body of water from Lake Ontario. And I am on my way, about 4 hours and 21 minutes away. It'll probably be longer, but that's what the GPS is telling me. It'll be longer because I'm stopping on my way to StokerCon Horror Conference, the 10th anniversary of StokerCon in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I wanted to do this special solo episode reflection to kind of talk about some of my reasoning for going down to StokerCon. And I thought it is Wednesday morning, June 3rd, I believe, as I'm recording this, and this episode's going to be going out on Friday, June 5th. Probably not going to edit this, so this may have all kinds of noise. Obviously, the sound's going to be a little bit reduced because of the fact that I'm driving, and you'll probably hear driving sounds, which if you're a long-time listener, you're going to be very familiar with. You may actually hear throat clearing and stuff, which I do regularly when I'm recording, but I'd probably delete 99.9% of those moments. I'm not sure if I'm going to have time to do that here or not, so my apologies in advance if you are hearing that. So, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably aware of the fact that I have worked in the book industry since 1992. I've been involved in self-publishing since 2004. I was at the helm of creating Kobo Writing Life, which launched in 2012, and am the part-time Director of Business Development for Drafted Digital, whom I consult for. I'm relatively well known in certain circles within writing and publishing. I mean, most people who know my role in the book industry know me probably because they first heard me on the Creative Pen podcast with, of course, Joanna Penn. Interestingly enough, I just did an interview with Joe yesterday morning. It was a fantastic conversation we recorded for a forthcoming episode of the Creative Pen podcast, so you'll probably hear me there, or maybe you're hearing this episode because you heard me on the Creative Pen podcast initially, or in the many years that I've been on that show. But all that is to say is that I am known in, again, certain circles within the book industry and within the self-publishing sphere. But there's a whole other side to me, and this is the side that drew me into writing in the first place, and that's one of the primary reasons I'm going to StokerCon. So I have been a horror writer for a long time. Now I do write, the novel series I have is urban fantasy, and I do write a lot of books for writers. I would consider the true ghost story books that I write and publish, most of those, all of them so far actually, through traditional publishing. But I would consider those sort of a connected genre to horror, if not horror itself, because it is, the macabre. I like speculative fiction in general, and I would say I've always identified as a horror author because the speculative writing that I mostly write usually doesn't align with science fiction, because science fiction usually involves some sort of science, or at least somewhat of a knowledge of science, and I've never really been all that smart or good at most of the sciences, although my first traditionally published pro-paying short story sale in 2001 was a science fiction story, but it was meant for a grade 4 level, and it was based on grade 4 science, so at least it was science that as a 20-something-year-old, was I 20-something then? I probably was. 20-something-year-old could probably understand, because it was just basic properties of light. It wasn't too complex like the kind of science that many of my friends, like the Dean of Canadian Science Fiction, Robert G. Sawyer, often write about. So most of the stuff I wrote would be similar. I used to say, and I continue to say, Twilight Zone style fiction. So the weird, eerie stuff that probably more aligns with horror than it would align with science fiction. And when I think of fantasy, okay, there is urban fantasy or contemporary fantasy, but historically I always thought of fantasy as sword and sorcery, Dungeons and Dragons, sort of Victorian era style worlds with dragons and knights and magic and things like that. So I just went with horror because, the three main genres, science fiction, fantasy, and horror, that kind of aligns more with that. When I started off, I was going to conferences as a writer. I remember my very first conference was the initial incarnation of CanCon, and it was something like, it had to have been 1993, because I had published 2 short stories that were in print by then. The first one was a young adult humorous piece that was my very first short story, published in 92. And then in 1993, my very first horror story was published. It was called Phantom Mitch. And it also appears in my horror collection, One Hand Screaming, by the way. But Phantom Mitch, and that's Phantom, M-I-T-C-H, Mitch, as in the nickname for somebody who might be called Michelle. Which is the case in that story about a man whose wife was named Michelle, who dies in a tragic car accident where he was drunk driving. So he lost both his wife Michelle, aka Mitch, and he lost his arm in that same accident. And the premise of the story is related to the concept of the phantom itch, which I remember first speculating about back when I was in university. I did graduate university in 92, so I must have written the original version of the story sometime between 88 and 92. And the thought was, based on the idea that with a phantom itch, people who have lost a limb can sometimes feel what they call a phantom itch on the limb that doesn't exist. And I thought, well, what if that limb does exist, but it exists in another world or in another realm? And what if, with this phantom arm, he feels the hand of his dead wife holding his hand? Interesting, romantic, and macabre premise. And so the whole idea is a story about Barry and his loss. Now, he lost his right arm, or left arm, one of his arms. He lost his vision. He lost one of his eyes in that. And so this is a story of Barry realizing that he can still connect with his dead wife. It was a long aside for Phantom Itch. But I think it's a long aside because I really love chewing on speculative what-ifs and horror what-ifs, right? Okay, so what if that Phantom Itch thing is actually because of this? And what if you could actually, that was in the other world, and if there was still a connection between you and that arm, is that a connection of you into the afterlife? And so that was the premise for that story. And that's the kind of stuff I really love writing and speculating about. That's what drew me to writing in the first place. I've spent so much of my time, because my parallel careers as a bookseller and as a writer, I would say like my writing actually started in the early to mid 80s, and submitting in the mid 80s, and then finally getting published in 92 and continuing forward. But 92 is also the year I graduated from university, and also the year that I started working in the book industry. And one of the reasons, I've said this in talks and probably on this podcast numerous times, is that my mom had given me advice. She said, well, if you want to be a writer, make sure you have a good job. And well, I sort of didn't follow her advice, but I did, because I got a degree in English. Where am I going to get a good job there? I did apply into the journalism programs, because I thought, okay, good job. I'm going to be a journalist. That's going to be the job I'm going to have. I'm going to go to journalism school. I'm going to get a job in journalism, and I'm going to write my stories, my fiction on the side. And that's how I'm going to live my life. Now, I was never smart enough to get into the journalism program. There was really limited enrollment, so I applied to 3 different journalism programs. I didn't get into any of them, but I did get into the English Language and Literature program at Carleton University. Carleton still has a great journalism program. And so I went to Carleton with the thought that, well, maybe I'll do first year English, and then maybe I can get into journalism the second year, or maybe, and I thought, okay, I'll take film studies as a minor and see, and although it was film studies, not filmmaking, which I thought would be more interesting. But anyway, so I did that somewhat useless degree in English language and literature. I jokingly say it's a useless degree because a lot of the social sciences degrees don't really qualify you for much work other than, well, retail. Hey, I was doing retail. I was a bookseller. But you know what they do? They're actually, I shouldn't slag them, because I learned how to think critically. I learned how to read critically. I studied literature. I studied books. I studied writing. I studied social aspects of writing and how writers often adapt things into their works. And honestly, I mock the lack of practicality in such a degree, but honestly, that degree was very useful for me. But it wasn't something that was going to help me get a job. So I was working a few different jobs throughout university, working at a theater company, doing theater tech stuff, which is like lighting and audio and all the behind-the-scenes stuff in theater. I was working as a security guard and for initially Pinkerton and then Wackenhut, and doing a lot of special events and stuff like that, which is, shift work and things. It was great to pick up the shifts for football games and hockey games and concerts and stuff like that. And I also worked for PM Displays, which was a trade show company that set up trade shows in Ottawa and area. And then I started working as a part-time bookseller at the Coles on Spark Street in Ottawa, store number 23. Coles number 23, no longer in existence, but it was on Spark Street, closest to Bank. Huge store, a gigantic store that had 2 floors. When it first opened, there was the downstairs had like the remainders, almost the entire bottom floor was remainders, and then the upstairs, it was a massive store. But I was working in the book industry then and writing, and so continuing to write my stories and working for below minimum wage, even as I moved from store to store, eventually became an assistant manager, moved from store to store throughout Ottawa, and then moved over to the chapters in Ancaster. It was the big box stores that were opening, and became a product manager there, where I was responsible for the inventory of the product of the store, which was 100,000 titles. It was a $6 million a year budgeted store. I oversaw the marketing, and I got to do some really cool events. I did one of the things I remember doing was Sci-Fi Saturday, where I had invited a whole bunch of cool Canadian science fiction, fantasy, and horror writers that included Rob Sawyer, Douglas Smith, Marcel Gagne, and Sally. Oh my God, I'm blanking on her name. Travasic. Marcel and Sally, and James Allen Gardner and Andrew Weiner, no longer with us. Ado Van Velkom. I think that's what we did. Sci-Fi Saturday. So I did a bunch of events like that, and so that was just like all day, just science fiction people doing readings and book signing and stuff like that. And so I was building a career as both a writer, and I participated as a writer for it, but I was also the host. So that was an interesting role where I was the host as the product manager for the store, but I was also, hey, I'm a writer too, because Marcel and Sally had published me in an anthology they had been editing, and I've, collaborated with various writers over the years. But anyways, that was in the late 90s. And I then moved throughout the book industry. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but as I worked through the book industry, and particularly around the time that I was working at McMaster University and I started playing with print on demand, with the Espresso book machine, and helping writers with self-publishing their print books, and I had also been doing ebook experimentation with Amazon. So KDP and Smashwords, and even getting my books onto Kobo, which was a nightmare at the time. They did not have a system for it. I got hired in 2011 by Kobo to come up with a solution for self-publishing, which became Kobo Writing Life. And that was around the time when I really got to be known in certain circles of the book industry as Mark from Kobo, or Mark, the book industry guy who is helping other writers with self-publishing. And it's been an amazing career. I loved the work I did. I actually sort of retired from full-time employment at Kobo in 2017, because I finally, after years and years and years, finally got to a point where the money I was earning from writing was enough. It was nowhere. It wasn't a huge amount, and it was enough because my partner makes a really good income. But it was enough, as a mid-5-figure earning author, that I didn't need to work full-time anymore. And I thought I was going to write full-time. When I left Kobo at the end of 2017, I didn't quite make it a year with being a full-time writer, because one of the challenges I recognized, I was working 60 and 80-hour weeks. I had been doing that consistently for years and years and years. Now, one of the reasons why my first marriage failed was I was married to my work and my writing more. That was my mistress, as my ex pointed out to me. And so I worked an exceptionally stupid amount of hours, and I continued to do that when I was with Kobo. And that took away my writing time. So I really wanted to focus on writing, and I started doing that almost 10 years ago. But the challenge with that was when I was working full-time, I really had to make an effort to write. Write in the morning before I get on the train to go to work, or write on the train on the way into Toronto, which I couldn't do because I don't dictate. I don't dictate, he says, while dictating in a vehicle while driving to a conference. But that's different, I guess, because this is non-fiction-y. But I didn't get as much writing done while I was working these incredibly stupid hours, but at least the work itself gave me some structure. And so whenever I had those free moments, I took advantage of it to get some writing done. And I thought, okay, if I have more time, I'll get more writing done. Well, the reality was I did not get the writing done because I had all the time in the world. And so by the end of 2018, I started working part-time for Drafted Digital. I love the guys from D to D. I was having a really great conversation with Chris Austin at Novelists Inc. And they wanted to hire me. And I was like, I love you guys, but I don't want to work full-time for anyone anymore. So we agreed to this part-time consulting role, which has given me an incredible amount of freedom and flexibility. Such as, today it's 11:55 a.m. Eastern. I did some work with Drafted Digital in the morning this morning. I'll probably connect again once I get to the hotel room, but I've got the flexibility to be able to do things like this conference, which I'm doing as a writer, not as a book industry guy. But taking that part-time role has significantly helped me because I've written way more since 2018 until today. In the last 8 years, I guess. And that's been good for me. It's been really good for me because, A, it kind of gives me a bit of a consistent baseline income because in the writing, because I'm not making 6-7 figures a year, the income is coming in strange pockets of time, and some months are great and other months are okay, and some months aren't as good. But a livable, consistent wage, regardless of how great or how poor the month is important. It alleviates a lot of stress or anxiety. But the time was great because I had the flexibility to do things. But I've still, despite 8 years ago, wanting to embrace the writing, I still have been curating and building this brand as a book industry guy. I mean, come on. This Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast is me wanting to help other writers. And the reality I know is I do absolutely love helping writers. I adore helping writers. It brings me intrinsic satisfaction and rewards to help other writers. So I know I can't stop doing it. I can reduce the amount that I do it, because every time I do that, it takes away from my own writing, which is critically important to me. But it's really interesting, and this is sort of the grass is always greener thing. I'm, again, relatively well known in particular author circles as this book industry guy, the guy who heard on the Creative Pen podcast, or the guy who worked for Kobo, or the guy who works for Drafted Digital, or the guy who's worked in the industry for a long time and one of the Wide for the Win people, and is there helping writers and coaching and talking about working with bookstores and stuff because I'm a former president of the Canadian Booksellers Association. But there is a different kind of satisfaction that comes from being a horror author. I've done a lot more in-person events lately, and just a couple weekends ago when I was at a conference a book show, a book fest, a book expo, where I didn't really sell a lot of books, but I had some really amazing connections in person with people who had never heard of me before, as well as a fan who was there and collecting my books and wanting to see, well, which one am I going to get this time? And I'll be honest with you, it's that magical feeling that's very similar to the feeling of walking into a bookstore or library and seeing your books on the shelf. By the way, I had that at the Burlington Public Library earlier this week. I went to see my good friend C.C. Humphreys. Chris Humphreys was launching a new book coming out from Doubleday Canada. And I was there, and I got to the library early because I'd been to events there before, but I'd never browsed the library. So I got there about half an hour early so I could walk around and check things out. And I found they had about 12 of my books, but I found 8 of them. I went to 2 different sections that I'm often in. So in the fiction section, I found 4 of my books, including hardcover version of A Canadian Werewolf in New York and a couple of my smaller short story collections. I also I think One Hand Screaming might have been there, but it might have been checked out. I think they have it, but it wasn't there, which is good. It's always good when you don't find them, but you know that they're there. And then I went to the paranormal or metaphysical section and found 4 of my traditionally published books. I later looked online and saw that, my Stupid Dad Joke book, they normally had, but was taken out. And I never even went into the movie trivia or the humor. I never even went into the nonfiction books for writers because they had several of those as well. But in any case, the ego boost, the vanity game, the ego stroking that happens when you see your books in person is akin to when you're at an event and somebody recognizes. Even some people who've come to my booth or table, I did a number of events in May and said, "Oh, I have that book at home. Oh, I didn't. You're the author. Cool. I love that book." Or coming and saying, "Oh, which one don't I have? Okay, I have this one. I have this one. I have this one. Which one should I get next?" And that just feels so incredible. I feel so incredible when I am there as an author. Yes, it's a powerful feeling when I'm there as an industry guy and I'm helping writers, and I know I'm in most places respected and appreciated, but there's something different about being appreciated as an author. Even struggle with the expenditure of going to a conference like this. Like, okay, so I'm not flying, it's close, it's StokerCon's in Pittsburgh, and it's about between a 5 and a 6 hour drive depending on time of day from where I live. And to be honest, it would take about that long to fly to Pittsburgh, so I may as well drive and then have a few things with me so I can pack a little bit better because I have everything in the vehicle. It's cheaper to drive, I believe. Who knows? I'm keeping the gas receipts, but no, it's mostly cheaper to drive than fly. But even the hotel, and then there's going to be meals. Although I did pack. I have some bottles of Ensure. I have some meal replacement bars. That's because if I'm on the go and I'm wanting to go from panel to panel to panel, I'm not going to want to stop for lunch. So quickly drink a meal replacement like that Ensure, or eat a meal replacement bar for breakfast, just to reduce the expenditure. Because I bought a 6-pack of the things, and much cheaper than a $30 lunch or whatever. But in any case, there's an expense that comes with it. There's an expense of time as well. And there's even, my partner Liz is so supportive and amazing, but also she's a very pragmatic person. And for the last few trips, like Halifax that I drove to as well, which is quite a bit further, but I did that as partially a boys' road trip with my bestie Steve. But Liz would ask us "Oh, is this something you're doing on behalf of Draft to Digital?" Because when I'm doing it on behalf of Draft to Digital, yes, there's going to be personal expenses because I'm always going to buy beer and stuff no matter where I go, and I'm going to spend my money, a lot more money than I should. But Draft to Digital often covers the expenses, right? So they'll cover the flight, they'll cover the hotel. And I do get a per diem. No, I don't get a per diem, but it's a reasonable expectation of buying food. But to be quite honest, because for a lot of my meals I buy beer, I usually just do that on my own dime because I don't want to hurt the company that I'm doing the work for. I'd rather treat that on a budget. I still do it as a tax write-off for myself when I do those meals. But in any case, Liz will always go, "Oh, is this a thing you're doing for Draft to Digital?" And I go, "No," and then she kind of gets quiet, gets this look that it kind of is like not a judgmental look, but it's also this, you're, making money in one area and then you're pissing it away in another. And now that's me completely putting words and thoughts into her head. But that's the feeling that I get when she gets quiet about asking that question. And even though Liz is the most incredibly supportive and wonderful partner a person could ask for, I still feel that judgment that I remember from my previous relationship, and the judgment I've always felt as a writer in terms of, like, this is just your little playing around and your hobby, which it was. I mean, for the longest time, technically, I wasn't earning a living on it, so technically it was a hobby, although I always had the idea that I wanted to make money. But I think that's also a part of why I feel that, or I'm feeling like that, maybe what she is feeling is because of that imposter syndrome, or the long time experience of knowing that, hey, I spent $5,000 this year to do writing stuff and paying for editing and covers and blah, 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 and I made $2,000. For the longest time, that's what my writing life was. Or my expenditures were $20,000 for all the things I did as a writer, and I earned $500 or $1,000 or maybe even $10,000. Yes, those days are gone. Yes, I'm spending a lot more on my writing, but I'm also earning a lot more on my writing. So those days are gone, but the imposter syndrome never really goes away. And so I'm probably putting that on myself when I believe that I see that look in Liz's eyes, that judgment. But as I was explaining to Liz, we were talking last night. I said, I'm going to StokerCon. And she's like, oh, are you going to be selling books there? Because again, I pay for tables at a lot of events, which can be very costly. And I sell my books there, but I don't do that when I cross the border. But I am doing a book signing. I'm going to have like a handful of books with me, just because I'm not taking a full table and a full display and all this stuff. I can't even take credit cards across the border because of the way Square works. But I thought, okay, if I'm there, somebody wants a book, I'm either going to just give it to them, or I'll just say, $20 for this book, and yada, yada, yada. Or they can do a PayPal thing or something like that. And then I can sign it for them. But I'm not going with the expectation of selling a lot of books. I'm really going to be an author and to, I am sitting on a panel. Actually, ironically, sitting on a panel talking about bookstores. But it's not going to be with a Draft to Digital hat on. It's going to be with my author hat on, an author who has managed a bookstore, and also an author who has done a lot of different events and activities and collaborations and partnerships with various kinds of bookstores. Independent bookstores, academic bookstores, chain bookstores, mall bookstores, indie bookstores, you name it. Online bookstores. So I'm going to be doing the panel. I'm going to be doing the mass author signing. I'm going to be attending the Bram Stoker Awards. I'm very excited because, this is kind of like in my industry. It's the coveted award. I've never really submitted anything for inclusion. So I want to go take a look at what it's all about. I want to understand it a little bit better, because maybe I can see about how one of my next books can be submitted properly for consideration. Now, I did in the last few years. I used to be a member of Horror Writers Association. I let it lapse for several years, although HWA kind of imploded, and just like RWA, Romance Writers Association, there was like so much infighting and BS. I was like, this is dumb. But I've gotten back into the HWA in the last couple of years because I want to reinvest in myself as a writer. And it also is a reminder that I don't want to be a poser as like, I'm a book industry guy, but hey, I'm also a writer. In a community like this, I want to just double down on the fact that I'm a writer. And I think I need to do this for myself, because I still have that imposter syndrome. I've been writing for the longest time. My first horror story, I'm going to go back to that Phantom Mitch story that was published in Wicked Mystic magazine. I believe it was October 1993. Now, it appeared in Ellen Datlow and Terry Windling's The Year's Best Fantasy and Horror for that year. My very first short story, horror short story that was published, received honorable mention in a Year's Best. It didn't get listed as Year's Best, but it was honorable mention. So that's a pretty big deal for me. I want to get back into doing more horror writing, and I want to see what I can do to continue to build the brand of Mark Leslie in the horror community, the way that I've built the brand of Mark Leslie Lefebvre, or Mark Lefebvre, in the book industry. I don't think I'm going to abandon either one of them. I don't want to. They're both very important to me in very different ways. I get intrinsic value and external value and all the things from both of them. I earn money as a speaker from some conferences. I earn money as a writer, speaker, a fiction guy or non-fiction guy as well. So I earn money from both sides. Obviously, I earn relatively predictable, consistent base income from what I'm getting with my consulting with Draft to Digital, but there's additional revenue that comes from that guy, including, thank you to my patrons who support this podcast over at patreon.com/darkreflections, as well as my coffee buddies who support this podcast at buymeacoffee.com/Mark Leslie. Love you guys so much. Thank you for your support. And also a shout out and thank you to those who also, because there are people who do both, who support me over on Substack, and the others who support me over on Substack, where I'm kind of, leveraging this content in this kind of content in numerous ways for different people. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about going to StokerCon and what that means to me, but also lay out the fact that if you know me as, somebody potentially that you respect, who seems to know what's going on in the book industry, and you listen to me to get some insights and reflections about the reality, because I do like to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm very positive in my approach, but I still do want to take a more realistic look at publishing and not say, yeah, just because I'm doing this, you can do this too. I want to give you ideas and I want to inspire you to find your own path, but I want you to be very reflective on what your goals are and what's important to you. So you may potentially think that I know what I'm doing, and that's probably part of the branding, but like you, and like most people, a lot of it I'm making it up as I go along. And a lot of the times, no matter what I've accomplished, like think about the things that I have accomplished, including the creation of Kobo Writing Life, the great stuff I've done with Draft to Digital, pushing to get the payment splitting in for authors, pushing hard on Draft to Digital print, getting bookshop.org signed up as a partner, as well as a few other partners over the years, although that's the biggest one I'm proudest of, because I love indie bookstores so much. Becoming a judge of Writers of the Future, which is a beautiful combination of me as a speculative fiction writer and as a book industry guy, but I think it was my book industry knowledge and know-how that got me there more than my writing, because I'm not a New York Times best-selling author like most of the rest of the judges. But despite all of these accomplishments, I still have imposter syndrome. I still wonder when my partner looks at me and is quiet, I go, oh, she's judging me because I'm a loser. Because I'm a loser who doesn't make enough money from his writing yet. Because I've been working at this for over 40 years and I still haven't passed 5 figures a year. So I'm sharing this in as frank and as open a way as I can to let you know why I value I'm so excited to be hanging out with writers and being there as a horror author, and I'm kind of sad Jonathan Maybury's not going to be making it there, because it's always great to hang out with him as a horror author. So much fun. We've done so many panels over the years on that, but also I met Tim Wagoneer at Superstars last year, and I know he's going to be there. So there's going to be a bunch of people that I've met and interacted with that I'm going to get to see again. But I just want to live it up as Mark Leslie, the horror guy, and I'm so looking forward to that. But I also have this fear, I have this anxiety, and I have this imposter syndrome. That regardless of all the amazing things I've been lucky enough to do, or that I've worked my butt off to get to and achieve, I still have that. And that, my friend, may never go away. I don't think it goes away no matter who a person is or what they got to. I know there was a moment when I think it was either Kevin Anderson and I were either backstage at RushCon, and we were hanging out with Terry Brown, one of the producers from Rush, and Michael Sadler, lead singer for Saga, and who Kevin does know Michael, but had never met Terry before. And you know, because Kevin, like me, is just a beautiful nerd, and he's always seen himself as a nerd who couldn't get a date in high school, right? So we do share that. We do have that in common. But he turned to me and goes, "Did you ever think, you know, being that nerd in high school, that you'd be, back here standing backstage right in Massey Hall, or that you'd be here hanging out at Bubba Bash with so many amazing musicians that we've listened to and admired over the years, and they're just treating us like one of them." Or, as I often think as I'm sitting beside Kevin and Rob Sawyer and Orson Scott Card and Larry Niven and Tim Powers and Nancy Kress and Jody Lynn Nye and so many amazing Tim Powers and Catherine Kurtz, and the list goes on and on and on, that I'm thinking, what the heck am I doing here with all of these superstars, many of whom I grew up reading? That imposter syndrome never truly goes away. So even if things look great and shiny and polished on the surface, which is like that thing we portray on social media, it is very often also the case that behind the scenes, the person behind it is not as confident as they appear, is not as cocky as they might at first seem, still feels insecure, and still feels a huge amount of imposter syndrome along the way. And as I go to close this off, and I'm getting close to the Canada-US border, I shouldn't be recording this as I'm crossing the border. That would just be weird, or potentially not legal, or looked frowned upon, looked down upon. To get to StokerCon, I'm feeling the way I felt going to that first conference in the early 90s in Ottawa, where I was there as a horror writer who had one published horror story, maybe 2 or 3 by that point, like a horror poem and stuff. But I'm feeling like that insecure guy who just wants to be with all the cool horror writers and hanging out. And I think, even though I may be complaining a little bit about my anxiety and about my imposter syndrome, I think it's a pretty cool place to be. Because at the end of the day, I'm so lucky that I have spent most of my life pursuing something I truly love and believe in, which is writing and storytelling, and also selling books and helping publishers and helping writers. I'm so lucky that I get to do these things, but also so lucky that my partner is supportive, that here I am, off yet again, taking off, leaving all the responsibilities of the house and the animals in her hands, while I go off to play at my game of being a writer. And again, that's me being imposter syndrome Mark. But I'm so lucky that I get to do these things that I'm doing. And I'm so nervous about going to StokerCon and being that little horror author guy. But I'm also so excited that I get to rub elbows with and learn from and hang out with folks from that community that I first dreamed of being a part of, as I was a teenage boy wanting to write my scary stories and get them out into the world. So with that said, I'm just going to wrap up this entire discussion here. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I do appreciate all y'all listeners. Thanks for being here with me every week. I'll be back next week as always. If you like this episode or any episode, please feel free to share it with a friend. Share it with someone that you think would find value in it. You can also leave a review wherever you do listen to this podcast. And of course, comments. I always appreciate your comments and your thoughts and your reflections. So what do you think? In terms of my anxiety and my imposter syndrome, in terms of the dual life and the many roles and lives of Mark Leslie Lefebvre, what are your thoughts? How do you approach that world of writing? How do you approach, where you are as a writer and where you potentially want to be and potentially the perceived judgment that others might have? If you'd love to hear your thoughts and reflections, and you know how to contact me, leaving comments at starkreflections.ca or where you're listening to this podcast, or just messaging me directly. But until next week and until next episode, this is, as always, Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomtech.com.